Chug-a-lug, chug-a-lug, make you wanna holler, howdy-ho. Burns your tummy, don't you know?
Hey, everybody.
Chug-a-lug, chug-a-lug.
Good evening. It's the Allman Report on NewsTalkSTL. What do you all chug-a-lug when you're listening to the show this evening? What do you chug-a-lug? Is it wine in a mason jar? I hope actually it's hiatus tequila, which is the official tequila of the Allman Report. I'll explain that a little farther down the line. Did you know tequila is actually better for you than other liquor? It has half the calories of vodka, gin, bourbon, everything else. And if it's 100% agave, it makes you healthier. You believe that? Tequila not only makes her crazy and makes her take her clothes off, it also is healthier for you. I feel like I'm the doctor from the Chesterfield cigarettes ad back in 1930 or something. You know, Chesterfields are good for you. Whatever. Let's get to the real theme. Boom. Hey, thank you, by the way, not only to my friends at Hiatus, because they're great people. I'll explain more later, but thank you to Newstetter's Fine Jewelry for your support of this show. The Walner Home Selling Team, Grasser Electric, Hanson's Tree Service, St. Louis Bath and Renovation, my buddy Rob Very, and on down the line. Good morning this morning. I can still say that, right? Even though it's evening. Because you guys kind of missed that. Between dumb as a bag of hair and good morning this morning, good evening this evening. All right, so RFK Jr., this is so crazy. So even his family is hating on him. And as I mentioned before, this is a family that has harsher words to say about RFK Jr. and his support of Donald Trump than they did about Senator Ted Kennedy drowning his girlfriend in a creek in 1969. It's like, really, people? And all the other crazy, nefarious things the Kennedys do. Well, now it turns out that RFK Jr.'s wife, Cheryl Hines, who is a television star, is being ridden like a rented mule all over the internet just because of RFK Jr.'s support of Donald Trump. And Hollywood is, in the words of RFK Jr., bullying her. One of the biggest bullies is this left-wing crazy Bradley Whitford. Now, it's interesting because if you all watch The West Wing or watched The West Wing, Bradley Whitford's character was pretty cool. I actually watched it all the time. It's a good show. But now it turns out most everybody on that show is a bunch of left-wing loons. And so many people are coming out in force on the internet. So RFK Jr. went on TMZ, not normally a source for news, but sometimes they do pretty good work. And they actually talked to him about the craziness with which the left is attacking Cheryl Hines.
Thrown in support behind Donald Trump. There have been stories that have surfaced over the last day or so that his wife, Cheryl Hines, was involved in this, as the reports go, that she may have even met with Trump and her husband and gave some encouragement.
I would say that Cheryl's reaction was the opposite of encouraging.
I mean, and that's true. In fact, he gets to a point, and I'll let him talk, but where he talks about how this was going to test their marriage.
I said President Trump was shot. And we learned from his associates that he wanted to have this conversation with me. She urged me to do that, and she did that out of compassion. It was an emotional night for our country. It was an emotional night for everyone.
And of course she did, because keep in mind, I mean, RFK Jr. has the junior from RFK who was assassinated in July of '68 on his way to winning the Democrat nomination, by the way.
and she made the right judgment. She did attend a meeting, with a subsequent meeting with President Trump. She attended that meeting mainly to make sure that there were no hasty decisions made at it.
Yeah, so it translated, that means that she wanted to be there for the meeting because she didn't want RFK Jr. to suddenly willy-nilly accept a cabinet position, whatever else. And she says that would test their marriage if he winds up in the cabinet, but that shouldn't be the case. It also goes to show you just how crazy and mean the left is. And I'll get to that in a second.
I've heard this has been a really difficult issue for Cheryl. It's the opposite of what she would want to do. She went along with it because she loves me and she wanted to be supportive of me.
And that apparently pisses Hollywood off. Love and support, as a companion and a marriage partner.
It's not something that she ever encouraged. I would say it was her trepidation about this and discomfort with this was, I would say, were the dominant feelings.
There could be different reasons for trepidation. Is it accurate to assume the trepidation is that she does not support Donald Trump?
Yes. She's a lifelong Democrat, and the idea of me supporting Donald Trump as president was like I said, it's something that she would have never imagined, that she never wanted in her life, that I think causes her a lot of discomfort. And, I'm very grateful to her for giving me personally support. But she was not somebody who was clamoring for this move.
And unfortunately, as you know, with anybody associated with anything related to Donald Trump in Hollywood, they become blacklisted. And Cheryl Hines is a hero in many ways for supporting RFK Jr. in this decision. And you know how some of these things can go. I mean, it was at a considerable risk, not just with his family, but with Cheryl Hines, for him to come out and support Donald Trump, which was hugely brave. RFK Jr. really doesn't need a job that badly. He doesn't even need to work. You know what the Kennedys are all about. So the fact that he came out and knew he was going to get such backlash, not only from his family, but even for that matter from his own wife, is pretty brave.
I would say the opposite was true.
Bradley Whitford from West Wing.
The guy had to kind of remember, because this was 20 years ago, that Bradley Whitford was anything anyway.
Went on Twitter yesterday and just blasted Cheryl, saying, "Hey, Cheryl Hines, way to stay silent while your lunatic husband throws his support behind the adjudicated rapist who brags about stripping women of their fundamental rights. Gutsy, great example for the kids. Profile in courage."
Wow. Really, Bradley? And by the way, this adjudicated rapist is just a hair split. It's the same thing Stephanopoulos did when he said on ABC that Trump was convicted of rape, which is absolutely untrue. And you can't call him an adjudicated rapist to try to get around calling him a convicted rapist. Come on.
I'm assuming you and Cheryl have seen that. I wonder what your reaction, what her reaction is to that.
My reaction would be, well, you can imagine, Harvey, that I had.
Hang on a second. This is on the fly, people. Hey, what's going on, Stephen?
Good. How are you, sir?
I'm great. So is there a way we can arrange this for a few more minutes, or how do you want to do this?
How do you want to do it?
Well, I prefer that we go ahead and do this maybe now.
Okay, let's just do it.
I'm going to have my producer of high esteem, Ethan, call you.
Okay.
And then we're going to get you up on the air here in just a matter of a couple minutes.
Is this live or tape?
It is live. But
okay.
That's okay.
I'm ready.
All right, buddy. So
Call me back.
All right, I sure will. Hang on. So that's Stephen Moore from the Prosperity Hotline. Stephen Moore is an esteemed economist. And so I'm going to pause for a second here, if you don't mind, and get Stephen on the phone, because one of the things about it is he was supposed to be on to start the show. And whenever I get Stephen Moore committed to something, he's always late or something around this. But I understand he's very much high in demand, as you can imagine. So if you all don't mind, this is the typical Allman way, right? You throw a tennis ball in the corner, and I'm over at the tennis ball in the corner. So we're going to get Stephen on the air here, and I'm going to talk to him about a few things regarding the economy and the Democrat Party threat to it and exactly what's going on. So we're going to have Stephen Moore on here in just a couple of minutes. But this Robert Kennedy Jr. thing, we're going to double back on, because there is a part of this story that should lead you to believe something else. And that is that all the polls you are seeing and all the anti-Trump polls you're seeing, it's no wonder sometimes Trump is polling less than his popularity really is, because nobody wants to admit they support him because of all the bullies out there. So I'll get back to this in a second. I want to get to my buddy Stephen Moore. Freedom Works. He's the Unleash Prosperity Hotline guy. I get it delivered to my inbox every single day, or at least on occasion. And all you have to do is subscribe to it. It's totally free. And if you just go to the Unleash Prosperity Hotline site and subscribe to it, you're going to get great news. And they even address on the Prosperity Hotline this morning how a beloved TV star became liberal Hollywood's public enemy number one. And I actually have been talking about that. Stephen Moore, how are you, my friend? Good to talk to you.
It's so good to have be on your show, and I really appreciate it. And you're right. I think what the Hollywood elite liberals have done to Cheryl Hines has been so outrageous. She, of course, is the wife of RFK Jr., Bobby Kennedy, and it just shows these people in Hollywood and these liberal elites. They keep talking about how tolerant they are, right? They love the word tolerance.
Yeah,
they're the most intolerant people in the world. Anybody who disagrees with me, they throw in the trash bin.
Yeah, and it's really sad. And I was saying earlier that it's no wonder some of the polling numbers for Trump always don't look as positive as you might imagine,
right,
because people don't want to admit, they don't want to wear a MAGA hat even because of the threat it's been called.
I remember, by the way, and you're exactly right. And I remember in 2016 when we were down. I worked on that 2016 campaign for Trump as one of his economic advisors, and we were down by 8 points or something. Remember, in the polls with about a week to go, and I was kind of feeling, oh gosh, it's going to be so tough to beat Hillary. And I remember seeing a bumper sticker, and it just cheered me up. I thought maybe we can win. And the bumper sticker said this. It said, "Vote for Donald Trump. Nobody has to know." And so there are a lot of quiet, people out there who may tell pollsters, "Oh yeah, I'm going to vote for Kamala," because that's the politically correct thing. Or when they get together with their friends, "Oh yeah, we're all going to vote for Kamala, right?" Yeah, sure. But when people got into that voting booth and nobody was looking over their shoulder, they pulled that lever for Trump. And that's why I think ultimately Trump is going to win this election, because he is, people really care about the pocketbook issues. The left wants this to be all about abortion and social issues and things. But most Americans really, can I pay my bills? Can I, take a vacation this year? Am I going to have to, how am I going to pay my credit card debt? Those kinds of things. And I mean, obviously Trump is much, much better on the economy than Biden Harris.
Yeah, no doubt. And I also remember back in the day, Stephen Moore, 2016, when you'd be in an elevator or you'd be in a meeting with people or you'd be hanging around a group of people or having dinner, and you might say, I support Donald Trump. And they're like, you do? We do too. Because nobody, it was always kind of like this secret club because everybody wanted to keep quiet about it for the backlash.
Yeah, and just so people understand this story about Cheryl Hines, I mean, she, of course, was the actress in Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is a very funny show. It's one of my favorite shows. Yeah. I don't necessarily agree with David. Yeah. On his politics, but he's a funny comedian. Yeah. Anyway, So she basically stood by her husband. And by the way, she's not even a fan of Donald Trump. You know,
No.
she said, like, I don't even like Donald Trump that much. But just because she stood by her husband, you know, RFK Jr. said, wait a minute, Democrats are out of their mind now. She said, I'll probably never work in Hollywood again.
Yep. And she did say that if he accepted a cabinet position, it would test their marriage. But that's just people being real. I mean, it's just one of those things. And I really think it's very sweet that RFK Jr. talked about his discussions with his wife. And it looks like they're a very happily married couple, and they are supporting each other even.
And by the way, and meanwhile, did you see what the other Kennedys did?
Yeah.
His sisters and his nephews and nieces, they called him a traitor.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They
traitor.
I said at one point they were harder on RFK Jr. than they were on Senator Ted Kennedy when he drowned his girlfriend. You know,
Exactly.
I mean, it's like, come on, people. So you're Stephen Moore. You guys do some really great stuff, especially as it relates to the economy, but even on things like this. You have a really great link to a post from the American Energy Alliance. And it's from the mouth of Kamala Harris herself on her vision for America and where she stands on energy. Here's a part of the clip that I want to play here.
So, yeah, and starting with what we can do on day one around public lands, right? And then there has to be legislation. But yes, and this is something I've taken on in California. I have a history of working on this issue. I support what we need to do around creating and having as goals timelines around how we're going to address greenhouse gas emissions.
And those timelines, Stephen Moore, also included a timeline for total transference to EV automobile technology. So she's a mess.
Yeah, how about her latest one? I mean, there's a funny ad, by the way, that the Trump people have put out, and it's Kamala versus Kamala, the real debate we want to hear, because is it the Kamala from last year or the Kamala from this year? Because she really has, flip-flopped. She would win a gold medal in the Olympics, with the way she's flip-flopping.
Yeah.
And the latest one, I mean, I just broke out laughing when I heard this, is she said the other day, "Oh, I'm in favor of building the wall on the border." Wait a minute. You're the one who said this is the most un-American idea you ever heard. But she's looking at the polls and saying Americans are pissed off, as we should be, about what's happening at the border. And so now she's saying she favors the border, the wall. She was the border czar for the first 2 years of the Biden administration, and she presided over the worst catastrophe on our border in history. And they want to put this person in the White House?
Yeah, and hopefully all of this inauthenticity will be very apparent, not in the Dana Bash interview on CNN, but in the debate that we're going to see on September 10th, because she can't escape that.
Well, you never know.
Yeah, I know.
mean,
True.
I wouldn't put anything past these Democrats. I mean, remember, Kamala Harris is the Democratic nominee. She didn't get a single vote.
Yeah. I think she came behind.
That's the party that says we're the danger to democracy, and they canceled out 13 million Democrat votes and said, no, we've decided that Kamala Harris is going to be the nominee. But look, I think Trump is going to win, and I think Trump is going to win because it is going to come down to the economy stupid, as Bill Clinton said. And it's going to be, who do you feel better about in terms of our energy security, our border situation, of getting rid of inflation? By the way, we didn't have an inflation problem under Trump. Do you recall that?
No.
None. There's no inflation problem. And now she's blaming Trump for the inflation. It's like, by the way, if you elected Kamala Harris to get rid of the inflation problem, it would be like, electing the arsonist to put out the fire.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt about it. And now she's into this whole price control thing and blaming the corporations for the costs of food and even gasoline and all the commodities that we have. And that's dangerous, too.
Well, now they're talking about, having grocery store police who will go down the aisles of the grocery stores and make sure they're not, putting a higher price on the Oreos or the dozen eggs or the ground beef. I mean, come on. By the way, did you see in Chicago, I think this is their next step. Did you see what Chicago did with their grocery stores? They're going to have the government run the grocery stores.
Wow. Well, they're already putting everything behind glass at the Walgreens and things like that. So, yeah, that is crazy. And it's interesting how they'll be more than happy to put grocery store police to monitor prices, but not to keep people from shoplifting. Very interesting.
Right. Yeah, and not to keep people from sneaking over the border.
Yes, no doubt about it. Stephen Moore, and I'm going to be discussing today, talking about across the border, this problem in Denver, where we now have this Venezuelan gang basically running the show there in Denver, taking over apartment complexes, everything else. I mean, this border situation is a huge one and starting to really affect people right at the ground level. We saw what happened in Chicago, where blacks in that community were made second-class citizens to illegal aliens, and it is absolutely crazy with this border, which has to be under control. Are you working with President Trump this time around?
Yep, we put together a great economic program. We're going to produce our American energy. We're going to keep taxes low. We're going to find $500 billion of wasteful government spending and try to bring this national debt down. We're going to have better trade deals that work for American workers and American companies, and we're going to make sure we can get the government off the back of businesses. I mean, Biden's regulations of our businesses have cost the average family almost $50,000 over a 10-year period. So these are like, that's why when Biden said, I didn't raise taxes on anybody who makes less than $400,000. Yes, you did. Every time you go to the grocery store, you're paying the Biden inflation tax.
Yeah. Well, I do remember one quick thing before I let you go here. During the Trump presidency, do you remember when we were, the third largest oil exporter in the world? And I remember all these people would go down to Texas, for instance, and they even had apartments set up for them, and they'd make gobs of money working in the oil fields and sending the money back to their people. Those places have now dried up. There's no industry down there.
Yeah, because what's happened is, we've been producing a lot of oil even under Biden, except guess what? We're not doing any new development because they're not doing any of the leases. So, if that continues, and by the way, who do you think benefits the most when we don't drill for oil? Oh, let's see, Russia, China, Iran, OPEC, all those countries that hate us. So it's not just bad for our economy, it's bad for our national security when we don't pump for our own oil and gas, which, by the way, we have more oil and gas and coal than any other country in the world. We should be using it all.
Well, you know that Kamala Harris isn't going to be releasing any more leases, so that's for sure if she becomes president. Stephen Moore, Unleash Prosperity Hotline. You folks can subscribe to that. What's the best website for everybody to go to get all this stuff?
Just go to unleashprosperity.com.
Okay, perfect.
By the way, that hotline that you're talking about, you know what it costs? Zero. It's free.
It's an inflation buster.
Yeah, we wanted people to get it so you can be the smartest person in the room when you're debating your liberal friends. Right
on. Stephen Moore, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for the generosity of your time. Glad we could fit it in. And Godspeed to you, sir, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
All right, that is Stephen Moore on the fly, everybody. Great job, Ethan, making sure this all happens. So coming up, and we talked about this yesterday with Doug, who said, you know what? It's going to get so desperate for these people as they see the true numbers and they're feeling the thundering herd in favor of President Trump. Well, it's already starting. And my buddy Jimmy Hoff, the Gateway pundit, has proof of that in a variety of states where they're already starting to plot some kind of interference with election integrity. So Jimmy Hoff, the Gateway pundit, straight ahead. Good evening, everybody. This is the Allman Report on News Talk STL.
We now return you to the Motion Worker album, which is already in progress.
Yes, you're in the right place this evening, everybody. This is the Allman Report on News Talk STL 101.9 94.1. Don't forget, you can follow News Talk STL on all the social media platforms, including Facebook, X, Instagram, Rumble, YouTube, Truth Social. You name it, you got it. Hey, the latest, this is interesting, Texas Governor Greg Abbott has announced that since he signed Senate Bill 1 into law in 2021, Texas has removed more than 1 million ineligible voters from its voter rolls. Some of them dead, some of them non-citizens. Some people who've moved out of the state were no longer residents, but were still on the voting rolls. 6,500 of that 1 million non-citizens. So this is another example, another reason why the Democrats are going to try to get fancy as they get more desperate, as they see that Trump is going to be able to win and they're not going to be able to cheat. So we will see how that goes. Jimmy Hoff, the Gateway Pundit, is so good. This Gateway Pundit site, you guys, it has to be your go-to place every day, because you're not going to get the kind of coverage that sometimes is even more locally based in terms of state by state regarding especially the election shenanigans. So I'll give you an example of one of the posts. So he talks about how this Michigan Democrat Secretary of State made this threatening video warning election officials not to question the next cheat. And the video goes a little like this.
If someone were to violate the law and not certify the election at the local level, we will come for you. So,
oh, really? So anybody who might dispute any kind of election integrity, according to Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, we will come for you. This is the kind of thuggery we're going to see at a lot of different local levels. Jim Hoff, the Gateway Pundit, and thank you for exposing this. This is pretty brazen.
Yeah, it's disgusting, isn't it, Jamie? Yeah. It's good to be with you, by the way.
Yeah, good to be with you, too.
Yeah, absolutely disgusting. This is Jocelyn Benson. She's just a complete radical, the Secretary of State there in Michigan. And this is just an outright threat. And you're absolutely right. If anybody in the 2024 elections sees people dumping multiple ballots in drop boxes or sees a late night ballot delivery in the TCF Center at 4 a.m. in the morning, as we reported on Election Day last time, there was a van that came in the middle of the night, dropped off 61 boxes of ballots in the TCF Center. After all the ballots that the election workers there said were already counted, here comes in this van, drops off all these mysterious ballots. So you can't question that either. And of course, it was Jocelyn Benson, Jamie, if you recall, who hid an investigation going on in Michigan in 2020, right before the election. That was the GBI Strategies investigation. And that's where a group called GBI Strategies had turned in 8,000 to 10,000 fraudulent registrations into the Muskegon County Clerk's office, and they got caught because there's only 30,000 eligible voters in the county. This is something that was investigated at the time, didn't get any news in the state. They basically hid it from the media outlets, and then they turned it over to the FBI. It's disappeared. We reported that at Gateway Pundit, but these are the kind of things that are going on in Michigan that Jocelyn Benson doesn't want you to know about, and now she's threatening you. If you say anything about any situation that you may come across in Michigan in 2024, that they're going to come for you. It's really unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. And you also have on this same post a clip from the Attorney General Merrick Garland, who is using the J6 political prisoners to threaten anyone contesting the 2024 election results. Here he is talking about it.
Expressing concerns about the upcoming transfer of power and the potential danger of another January 6th. Do you share those concerns at all?
I think our prosecutions have made clear what we think about people who try to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power, which is an essential and fundamental element of our democracy. I quibble about whether we have 1,500 or slightly less than 1,500, but we have way more than 1,400 now prosecutions, and we have a substantial number of convictions.
I mean, this is, Jimmy, this is brazen too. I mean, this is an obvious threat to people pre-election not to cause any trouble or demonstrate on behalf of election integrity, which is actually what January 6th was all about.
Absolutely, Jamie. And by the way, this past week, the news broke, and we reported this at Gateway Pundit, one of the latest victims, January 6 victims, this woman, she's a grandmother, she's a Christian. She walked inside the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. She prayed. They call her the praying grandmother. And then she left after 10 minutes. And this is one of the victims. This is one of the criminals, I should say, that Merrick Garland's talking about. She was just sentenced to 6 months home arrest. And we've seen this over and over with Merrick Garland and these poor individuals who've been persecuted by the Biden administration for actions they took on January 6th. And most of them had no idea they were breaking any laws. They didn't tell them this until, weeks later when the FBI comes knocking on their door. These people who went inside the Capitol, they had no idea that was illegal. I've talked to, we've covered this at Gateway Pundit extensively, hundreds of individuals we've talked to. And these are the victims. I think it's fair to say we saw evidence yesterday come out where Nancy Pelosi's walking through the hall in her secret with her film crew on January 6th, talking about she should have called in the National Guard. And I would argue, Jamie, that if the National Guard would have been called that day, that there never would have been riots. But Nancy Pelosi is the person who called them off. She was told to bring in the National Guard by President Trump. She called them off. I call this Pelosi's insurrection.
Yeah.
If the National Guard would have been there, none of that would have happened.
Right.
And so I put the blame all at the feet of Nancy Pelosi.
Well, and if the National Guard had been there, the feds and the deep state operators would not have been able to manufacture the violence, which is exactly what they did, pushing the people into fences, all that kind of stuff. That's on the record.
Absolutely. And there'd be 4 individuals who'd be alive today. They were all Trump supporters who were dead that day when the day was over.
Yeah.
One woman who was shot, another who was smothered on the steps of the Capitol, and 2 other individuals who had heart attacks when the police started firing these flash grenades and gas canisters at the crowds. So, what a tragedy. It's just upside down world.
These people are going to try anything. And one of the more hilarious attempts was made recently by Kamala Harris after she posted a letter that was a pro-gun control letter signed Tucker. Well, obviously the implications are clear. You reached out to Tucker Carlson and you got a statement from him today in response to this letter. Tell us about the letter. First of all, it's a handwritten letter, right?
Right. It's a handwritten letter, and it's from Kamala, and it starts out, Kamala, we don't agree on everything, but thank God we have freedom of speech in America, which is something Tucker would never write to Kamala Harris because he knows what's been going on the past 4 years with these Democrats. It goes on to say that he's all for common sense gun laws. So I reached out to Tucker Carlson this morning and said, Tucker, this letter that was posted by Kamala Harris on her Twitter page, it sounds like she's quoting you. And Tucker Carlson wrote me back and said, I'll read you what he said to us. He said, seriously, I'm carrying a gun right now, as I always do, Tucker says. There are a few things I hate more than Democratic Party's attempts to disarm the American population. That's what dictatorships do. And he goes on and says, people actually think I sent a handwritten letter to Kamala Harris endorsing gun confiscation? Well, that's moronic. That's what he says. So we put that up. And you know what is so funny, Jamie, is that later on today, Tucker Carlson then posted on his own Twitter page a fake letter coming from Kamala to him about how much she loves Bobby Kennedy and how much Bobby Kennedy has never told any lies, and she's such a huge fan of his. It's really hilarious. I hope your audience reads it. It's classic.
Yeah,
it's a classic.
And of course, this is classic gaslighting and passive aggressiveness because everybody's like, "Well, we didn't mean Tucker Carlson. What are you talking about?" It's like, "Oh yeah, you did." I mean, the implication was clear, and you're just playing shell games here. And one thing I did note about Kamala Harris's tweet, and this is an indication of really actually how dumb she is. She spelled common sense as one word. Common sense gun legislation. And common sense is one word. I'm like, really, lady? Crazy.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. Something else, we had an AI expert that we use quite often, and we had him look at this because there was, I noticed a couple comments under this Kamala tweet that said, this looks like AI. We ran it through one of these, AI detectors, and it said that it was AI generated. And sure enough, our contact said, yes, this is AI generated. They rewrote it, and put it in handwriting, but it's most likely, a certain percentage that it was AI generated. So it's not even real in that respect either.
So you can do that. You can take a piece, something written, and send it the other way through AI to see whether or not it was AI generated, huh?
Yes, there's ways to do that now.
Wow.
And then you'll get something back like it'll say like it's 70% likely AI or it's 85% likely AI. So that's how that works. And we have a person who's been helping us with AI and some of the stories we've written for several years now. So
yeah,
that's what he told us about this article that was written on Kamala's Twitter page.
Unbelievable. All those Ivy League executives better be on notice because we'll catch you plagiarizing sooner rather than later now. So it'll be great. All right.
Really?
Jim Hoff, the Gateway Pundit, buddy, thank you for just being with me through all these years. So happy for the gatewaypundit.com. You guys are doing really stellar work and work that nobody really is doing voraciously as you all are doing in conservative media at the gatewaypundit.com. So, Jim, great to see you again. Thank you so much for being on the Allman Report, buddy.
You too, Jamie. Always good to be with you.
All right. That is the Gateway Pundit, Jim Hoff. And, again, you're catching a common theme here, and it's one that Doug brought up yesterday and we've been talking about, is the desperation levels. We're starting to see a lot of these little stories, little things pop up, and the desperation level is getting really, really high. And especially as they get to the point of the debates in September and everything else, because that is when everything's going to unravel. Now, again, I'm with a lot of you. Don't be too overconfident, right? Because you never know what ABC is going to pull at this debate. So even though we hope it's a repeat of the Trump-Biden debate, you have to imagine that there's no way ABC is going to let that happen again. So they're going to do everything, in spite of all the fact that the Trump campaign won on the rule discussion, everything else, they're going to figure out a way, and you know it. All right, talked about this a little bit earlier with Stephen Moore. This situation in Denver, oh my goodness gracious, Venezuelan prison gangs, and these are, of course, people who've been released from prison in Venezuela, are now raiding Denver and taking over apartments and everything else. I'll give you the details on that coming up on the Allman Report on News Talk STL. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. This is the Allman Report on News Talk STL. 1019, 94.1, all over the interwebs, social media, and beyond. So I had the opportunity to go to the country of Colombia in May. And I went there because, Bogota specifically, because my niece was getting married to a Colombian. And man, Colombia is a great country. It's amazing the difference about 10 years makes in a country that once was war-torn, terrorism everywhere, drug dealers, FARC, you name it. And now it's as peaceful as can be. In fact, we went to the wedding, which was about a 2-hour bus ride away to a resort in a smaller community. And they were telling me that 10 years ago, you'd never take that bus ride because you'd be attacked by marauders and everything else. And so that's gone. because they went in there with the help of the U.S. and popped a bunch of them, and it's over. El Salvador is a similar situation because there's a lot of people now going to El Salvador to surf. Like the surfing there is apparently amazing. And so much of South America is pretty cool and cool countries. But for some reason, as you all know, Venezuela, because of its socialist policies, isn't. And of course, the reason is that it's falling apart. And so a lot of the illegals coming to this country, especially the ones committing crimes, are Venezuelans who've been sent here by the Maduro government and everything else. They've opened up their prisons. They send all the bad people out and ship them out of Venezuela and into the U.S. The classic story, of course, comes from Chicago, where even some of the violent Chicago gang members are scared of Venezuelans. There are some people who, this was a couple months ago, they were talking about how, well, yeah, you might think we're bad, but man, there's nothing worse than a Venezuelan in a stolen car around here. I mean, they are, and no offense to you if you're Venezuelan and you're listening to the show, and I'm not trying to malign all Venezuelans, but it is a matter of fact that some of the most violent illegals in this country just happen to be Venezuelan. So Denver, as you know, is a sanctuary city. And the New York Post is reporting that this city that welcomed so-called migrants with open arms is now bringing bloodshed to the suburbs next door. So you all know Aurora, Colorado, even though the town wanted no part of the asylum seekers in the first place, it's a bedroom community, population about 390,000, directly east of Denver, has become the operations base for this Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua. They've seized multiple apartment complexes, set off a wave of violent crime, and Denver still leads the nation in new illegals per capita. More than 40,000 of them arriving from the southern border since December 2022. They've bent over backwards, and this is from the report, even slashing emergency services to help foot the cost of $68 million and counting to support all of these illegals. But what's happened is, the Aurora City Council passed a resolution 7-3 stating it's not going to provide resources to illegals or others brought into the community from neighboring cities. They're just going to totally cut it off. But ultimately what happened is Denver's generosity has become Aurora's problem anyway, even though they're trying not to be part of this. And believe me, bedroom communities around Chicago are suffering the same fate because a lot of these illegals, well, they don't want to be around a bunch of crime in the inner city. So they bring it to the cities next door. So the gang violence is going absolutely crazy in Aurora. And they have, with the help of the money given to them by the city of Denver, because they're getting vouchers for housing and everything else, they're using it to get housing in these bedroom communities. So apparently the people who are passing this legislation to allow for the money aren't putting any strings on it, no strings attached. And so these people are now moving to nearby communities to avoid the violence of the inner city and creating inner cities out of places like Aurora. I've got more to tell you about that on the other side of this, and also the growing criticism of Kamala Harris as she brings her sidecar, Walls with her, to this interview that's supposed to be happening tomorrow on CNN. So I'm bringing that all to you here this evening on the Allman Report, 101.9 and 94.1 News Talk STL. toys this evening, people? Is that what you want? It's perfect for what I'm about to tell you about the nefariousness of all the open border people and the people who are purposely allowing this unbelievable influx of violent illegals into this country, and even nonviolent ones, because they're still voting and still taxing resources, whatever. And if I didn't know any better, I would think it was a total plan of sabotage of our country and its fabric. And keep in mind, anybody who talks about, well, it's tearing apart the fabric of our country, it's automatically racist, but that's not true. And it's true, they are tearing apart the fabric of our country. And one thing that will come out of this story in Aurora that I'm about to just kind of tell you more about here and then put the ribbon on it is that Aurora is going to vote for Trump. And so will a lot of people in Denver, because with 40,000 illegals, they have the highest per capita number of illegals. The New York Post calls them migrants, but they're not. They're illegal aliens. So anyway, with 40,000 and all the violence happening in Denver, and now with Aurora being taken over by this Venezuelan gang, it becomes untenable and a very obvious, open example of what happens when you have unfettered border opening. When you don't have anybody controlling the border or caring about who comes across and whatever. So this is, anybody who compares this whole border thing to the Statue of Liberty is a moron anyway, you know? Because that's not what, all those people who came over during that particular time, migration, came through Ellis Island. My family actually, on the English side, on my mom's side, they all came here in the 1600s, but the dad's side, they came through New Orleans. So if they were coming from the south, they came through New Orleans, and other parts came through Ellis Island. So the comparison is zero. So there's this guy called the Cookie Monster. He's a local gang leader who decided to set up shop in Aurora, and he goes by Galleta, which is Spanish for cookie. These terrible, violent guys always have these very innocent little names, don't they? Pappy and Cookie and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, within months of arriving in the U.S., the police say that he and fellow gang members brutally beat this guy at an Aurora apartment complex that the gang took over and occupied. Police arrested him in July, this time for a shooting at the same complex that left 2 men wounded. They're now responsible for a slew of violent crimes across the U.S. By the way, the gang member, the murder of this Georgia nursing student, Laken Riley, earlier this year, you guys know about that story, and the shooting of these 2 NYPD cops during an arrest in June. Remember those guys smirking at the camera when they were released and everything else? They're all members of this gang. So, and also a clear example of how the Venezuela government is physically sending its worst people to this country. And anybody who denies it and continues to support a free and open border in the way that the Democrats are is absolutely traitorous to this country and to its people. But people are starting to find out now. It used to be that people were like, oh, yeah, but they're coming over here for a better life. Well, now ask the blacks in Chicago who are now scared of Venezuelan gang members. Ask the people of Aurora who now have to pay for a task force with the Colorado State Patrol and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation to counter this increasing threat. So in one case, they took over this apartment complex basically free to take over anything they want to, because the apartment complex at one point that we're talking about here was shut down over code violations. And the owners wanted to fix the code violations to keep the apartment complex from being shut down, but the gang members were keeping the people from coming in and fixing stuff. So they basically just are squatting. They're basically insurrectionists. And these are the same people who are stealing from all the Walmarts and everything else. And they just are going around committing crimes, getting arrested, but then getting back out again. There's nobody at the federal level who is putting forth deportation proceedings or anything. Once these guys are in custody, and you find this all throughout the U.S., where somebody arrests an illegal. I talked to some police officers in St. Anne, and it's an attractive place for a lot of people who come across the border, a lot of immigrants, that kind of thing. But when they were arresting illegals, they would call ICE to come and pick them up, and ICE would never do it. So this is a system that is untenable and can only be fixed with the help of a renewal of President Trump's border policies. There's just no question about it. And, you know, if there's any good news coming out of this, and I never like to think of bad news as being good news because there are people involved. There are human beings who are victimized here. But if you want to look at a bright spot, it is that people in the U.S. who are here legally, who are trying to raise their families in a safe environment and trying just to go to work and do whatever, walk the streets, whatever, are finally seeing the direct results of our porous border. They're seeing it now in their real lives. And of course, this has been going on for 2 years now. They're seeing it in their real lives, in their communities. New York City now is considering, or I should say, reconsidering whether or not they're going to be a sanctuary city anymore, because this isn't paying off for the people of Aurora any more than it's paying off for the people of New York City. So they finally did nab Cookie last March, hit him with several felony assault charges, but he was bailed out by somebody, failed to show up for his court date, and so now he's just wandering around. Last July, they arrested him for shooting at the same apartment where the previous assault occurred. He was handed over to ICE at that particular time, ordered to be deported, but because he's a Venezuelan, guess what? The country doesn't accept deportations from the U.S. And now you know why. So they're sending over all their worst and sending over all their criminals. And so to deport a Venezuelan to Venezuela is impossible. They won't accept the Venezuelans who are deported. See how that game is played? So you talk about sabotage. That's exactly what this is. And something has to be done specifically about Venezuela. And how you can actually have a border policy where you're accepting people from countries that do not accept deportations is absolutely beyond me. Every other South American country accepts deportations, with the exception of a few. I believe Guatemala might be another one. I don't know. But Venezuela, for sure, does not accept deportation. So it's just a one-way street for these thugs, and a purposeful one-way street provided by the Venezuelan government that wants to get its criminals out of the country with the security that they're never coming back. They're never going to come back. So this is untenable. The only answer is a Trump election and a renewal of Trump's border policy. That's just that simple. And Aurora is a great example of that. So Trump wins Colorado, or Aurora at least. But these people aren't going to stop at Aurora. By the way, I did really like Colombia and Bogota, and spent a couple days in Bogota still. And man, they like their gin. They're my kind of people. in Colombia. They're great. They're very demure individuals. Like you go into a Bogota bar and no one is talking above a whisper, basically. That's not any yelly bars there. And the other thing they do in Bogota is when they go into a bar, they don't have a drink. They buy a bottle of gin or a bottle of vodka or a bottle of tequila. They sit it on the table and they sit there and drink the whole darn thing. I watched them because I was waiting for an Uber, and decided to pop into the bar and have a drink, and just sat there and watched these people. They were having the time of their lives. It was great. You just buy a bottle, sit it on the table, and boom. The other thing they do in Colombia, so we went to a Stella bar, and the Europeans really have noticed that there's a big market down there for a lot of their products. The U.S. hasn't quite caught on yet because we've mostly been scared of South America. But the fact is it's fertile ground for anybody who wants to expand any kind of commercial enterprise. South Americans are smart people, and they are good people, and they like to keep to themselves. Some of them are very poor, however, but still, and they're not coming over here either. They're staying down there. But one thing you notice at the Stella bar, so it's Stella beer, and which is pretty good beer. Not as good as the beer you're going to find at Bush Family Brewing and Distilling, but hey. So what they do is they sell. Ethan, do you drink?
Oh, occasionally.
Okay. So imagine this. So in South America, specifically Colombia, what they do at the Stella bar is they make drinks with the beer as a mixer. So on the menu, you see all these drinks. It's like Stella with gin, Stella with tequila, Stella with vodka. And it's pretty interesting. I didn't get one of those drinks, but when I came back home, I said, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try to make a drink out of. I think they put other things in it like, lime or cucumber or cranberry juice or whatever. But I came back. I got a 6-pack or a 4-pack of Stella. Well, they sell them like that. Got some gin. It made a drink with the Stella and the gin. Put a lime in there, and I was on my ass in about an hour. Because for some reason, whatever the mixture is, and maybe I did put a little more gin in there than I should have. Maybe they just put like a little shot in there. But who has a shot? Who measures their liquor when they're making a drink, for crying out loud? Pansies. But anyway, it did taste pretty good. So hey, listen, if you ever get a chance to get to a place like Bogota, I definitely would go because it's really actually a cool place. I'm not a surfer, so I won't be going to El Salvador anytime soon. But if you ever get a chance to go, I definitely would go. Don't go to Venezuela. And the problem here is that, and just as an aside on Venezuela and Colombia, is that Venezuela neighbors Colombia. But guess what? Venezuelans aren't coming over there. You know why? Because Colombia has a border policy. The Colombian government will not take you if you don't meet certain kinds of criteria the same way Mexico does. Like if you want to become a citizen of Mexico, you have to actually prove that you have a job, skills, a livelihood. You have to prove that you're going to contribute to the country. Hell, if we just adopted the immigration rules of Mexico, everything would be fine. But yeah, neighboring Venezuela, although Venezuela, if it falls apart, you never know what's going to happen. But right now, Colombia to the Venezuela, it's like, don't come here. You're not coming here. Don't come here, which is why it's Colombia is probably keeping itself fairly in good shape. That's happens. Just you'd be surprised how many countries have much harsher immigration rules than we do. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it, everybody. Coming up, all right. So Kamala Harris is going to have a partner in her interview. Walz is going to be her little comfort animal at the interview with Dana Bash. And we'll talk about that because actually even CNN, at least some of the conservatives on there are saying, man, this is really not a good look for Kamala. And it certainly is a reflection of how the campaign feels about her, her steadiness. And what's interesting to me, and you guys know sometimes I'm annoyingly pedantic about grammar. I'm not always the best at it either, especially when I'm speaking. But it's still, as I talked to Jimmy earlier in the show, I still can't believe she puts his tweet out and spells common sense as one word. And I'm thinking, that's stupid. Especially I know a little bit about common sense because I branded Common Sense Radio here in St. Louis, and that's what you're listening to. Good old-fashioned, conservative, common, one word, sense, the other word, on the Allman Report here at NewsTalkSTL. This evening, everybody. Good evening this evening. It's the Allman Report. News Talk STL 101.9, 94.1. Good evening this evening. Really happy to be back. Thank you to Newstetter's Jewelers. Newstetter's fine jewelry. Yeah, lab-grown diamonds, which are beautiful and amazing. Eric always tells me lab-grown diamonds aren't fake diamonds any more than flowers you get from a flower shop are fake flowers. They're all grown. They're just grown under certain conditions that make them actually sometimes even better than the ones that are grown organically. So the lab-grown diamond, great jewelry. Right there at Doherty Ferry in Big Bend. The Wallner home selling team of Berkshire Hathaway. The Wallners are great people. 314-810-SOLD. You can call them there. Grasser Electric. GrasserElectric.com. Shane, a longtime supporter of the show, friend of mine. And Hanson's Tree Service, thank you. I've got a couple of trees I need to take down. Guess what? Chad has a new program now where you can finance your tree takedown. So the one thing that Chad doesn't want to have happen is for you to say, oh, shoot, I don't really have the money right now to take a tree down. But if the tree needs to be taken down, you got to take it down. Even if you really can't pay for it all in one bulk place. So he has financing plans for you, which is really cool because he doesn't want your trepidation about expenses to get in the way of your safety because those trees are falling. Maybe on your people or your property or what have you, and you don't want that to happen. All right, this big event tomorrow on CNN with the interview of Kamala Harris and her guide dog, Walz. And it really is a slap in the face to all those who think that Kamala Harris is really something. But they're more than happy to have him as her sidecar because she's going to need it, and they know just how vacuous she is, and she needs somebody to bail her out. But before I get to that, it's interesting. Walz is such a phony, not only with the stolen valor stuff, all of his lies about awards and things like that. The guy is a propped-up socialist, defund the police guy as governor of Minnesota, just ran the place into the ground during all of the Floyd riots and everything else. But for some reason, he's now being portrayed as everybody's daddy, everybody's papa, coach. They can't call him Sergeant Commander anymore because he wasn't. But at the same time, they believe, and MSNBC is imparting this, that they think that Walz is going to take votes away from Trump from the lower educated voters that normally vote for Trump. Now, of course, you know how offensive the term lower educated voters are, because I don't think there's any such thing as a lower educated American. Sometimes the more highly educated Americans are a lot dumber than the so-called lower educated Americans. Presumably, when you're a lower educated American, you didn't go to college, which is so offensive anyway. It drives me crazy, but you guys have heard me pontificate about that. And keep in mind, lots of people with college degrees have helped ruin this country, and you all know who they are. Anyway, this is Tim Walz. MSNBC's promoting him as he's every man. Look at him talking about gutters. He's actually talking about gutters. Here you go.
For me, 100% agree. I've had problems with gutters before. You get your basement wet, you get ash dams, cause a lot of problems. It's not good. No, it is not, but there are fixes. Now, the other dangerous thing is that when you live in Minnesota, fall's a great time of year, a lot of leaves. You got to get up on a ladder. And they get stuck in the gutter. The leaves get stuck in the gutter. I've seen many a man.
You're just like everybody. You talk about gutters.
Many a man fall off the ladder. But there's a fix. You can put a gutter helmet over the top of it. A gutter helmet? It covers it. It lets the water go through, keeps it out of your house. I see this all the time. How often do you like looking at gutters? I look quite often, surprisingly, because I kind of judge it. No, I try not to be judgmental on people, but when I see a well-tended gutter...
It is interesting how this guy's not asking him any questions of any pertinence.
Just big money at Menards. He's exactly right. That's not how... That's not... No, I know you're right. I'm not good at that. You gonna leave it hanging like that?
He's just like everybody.
Right. Okay, you ready? On three. Save big money at Menards.
That's interesting how...
That is Democratic Vice Presidential nominee Tim Walz.
Real quickly, that is interesting how they're doing the Menards song right after Lowe's decided they were going to abandon the DEI thing. Did you hear about that? Lowe's is the latest to say, we're not doing DEI anymore. And all these nutbags on the Washington Post website were like, well, we're not shopping there anymore. So now I guess the promotion is Menards.
His hot take on gutters and caddy gutter helmets.
Oh, and excuse me, by the way, a lot of women go up ladders to fix gutters too. I was up the other weekend putting the helmet on my gutters in Virginia, making sure the leaves didn't fall in. So, Tim Walz, you missed something there.
He did. That was a well-received clip.
Wow, MSNBC is really doing yeoman's work in informing America this morning on the Morning Joe show, right?
On social media yesterday, but Caddy, you did indeed point out a flaw perhaps, but certainly this is, and then the singing the theme song at the end. I mean, this is part of the appeal.
Well, and you know what's interesting too is these people think that someone who fixes gutters and or cleans their gutters or goes to Menards is a mysterious person to them. These are the same people who were just amazed that you could buy food at gas stations. Remember the New York Times did a whole story about how, there are people in the South who go to gas stations and they can also buy food. That's like, okay, I get it that you're in New York City. You probably don't have a car. There aren't many gas stations right in the middle of New York City, but it's not just in the South. And in fact, what's so funny about that story is that a couple months later, there's Kamala Harris and her doofus husband and Walz marching into a gas station in Pennsylvania and buying Doritos. That was the big news. That was breaking news on the Forbes magazine website. Anyway, I digress.
In Coach Walz, as they refer to him in the campaign, that they feel like he's a regular guy who's going to appeal to regular voters, particularly in areas that maybe have not voted Democrat in a while.
And it's interesting how they think that going to Menards or a Home Depot makes you a regular guy. Because to them, I don't know how they live or what they do, or I don't know where this chick got her gutter helmets, but you know what I'm saying is that it's like, just because you go to Menards, does it make you like some kind of amazing regular guy? I mean, everybody goes to one of those stores.
Yeah, and particularly, the one area that they're struggling with, younger male, lower educated voters, perhaps, without a college degree. That seems to be an area where Donald Trump is doing very well.
That's what drives me crazy. When these elitists on the news talk about what they clearly think are a bunch of rubes, Now, apparently, they like the lower educated voter, so to speak. I'm sorry I'm using that term again, but I'm using it to attack these people for calling people who don't go to college lower educated. It's a real thing for me. It drives me nuts.
Walz definitely campaigning for those.
Yeah, you just go out there and talk about Menards, and you're going to win that dummy vote. It's like, really? That's crazy. Anyway, there's a CNN analyst on the CNN interview. And basically what they're doing is they are calling this a chaperone. And some people are also pointing out that she's bringing her dad to the interview with her. or maybe even as some kind of guide dog of some sort. We're going to see how this goes, but Scott Jennings, who's great, I think they've got two guys on CNN who are the so-called conservatives, and I remember they had Rick Santorum on there and a couple other people, and they were always so weak. They never really stood up for conservatism. They just kind of were really wishy-washy. Scott Jennings does a pretty good job on there.
Is the line now going to be, well, why isn't she doing it by herself?
Yeah, I do think people are going to bring that up. Look, I have great confidence in Dana and CNN to do this. I think it's incredibly weak sauce to show up with your running mate. The fact that they don't have enough confidence in her to let her sit herself, the actual top of the ticket, and do a single interview. In fact, I think the hand-wringing and the gyrations over this over the last month show a troubling lack of confidence in her political ability, which also makes you wonder as a voter, well, what kind of president would you be if this kind of a small-time decision, can we do an interview or not, what does that look like for your decision-making process, so on? So, I think Republicans are going to think it's pretty weak to show up with effectively someone to take up half the time.
Yeah, with a sidecar like Tim Walz. And I wonder if during the interview, before the interview, they're going to put like a vest on Tim Walz that says "Do not pet," since he's kind of her little comfort animal in this case. And Scott Jennings says, "I have full confidence in Dana Bash." Well, Scott Jennings is on CNN, and he's got to say that. I think that there will be, and I've seen Dana Bash interview J.D. Vance. I think she's a hack. But I think there will be a possibility we're going to get something out of this interview that is going to be embarrassing for Kamala Harris. This right now looks too perfect to survive perfection. And so I actually believe it's going to be a good thing. And at the very least, it'll be something that we're going to make fun of for the next few weeks. That is until the debate, when the true fun begins. All right, folks, we'll be back. This is the Allman Report on News Talk STL. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. This is the Allman Report. Jamie Allman here with you. News Talk STL. Follow us all over the joint, okay? Social media and beyond. You know, the Facebook, X, Instagram, Rumble, YouTube, Truth Social. We're there, too. So, if you want to do the Allman Report podcast, you simply download from any place you get your podcasts. Be there. Or you go to newstalkstl.com/Allman and you are there. So a lot of you, if the truth be told, don't experience the joy of unrealized capital gains. Because unrealized capital gains normally are something that people in a high caliber financial situation, meaning really rich people, experience. But keep in mind that really rich people are the ones who build stuff, sometimes even start companies, and employ people. So just because we do not necessarily come in the crosshairs of an unrealized capital gain tax doesn't mean that we shouldn't care about it deeply. So Kamala Harris now has a proposal to tax unrealized capital gains, and it might even be unconstitutional because you're taxing something that technically doesn't even exist yet. So on CNBC, they made fun of her, fun of one of the people who was trying to defend this, and mocked the guy because he tried to compare the tax on unrealized capital gains to the property tax, and it was ridiculous. Here it is.
The taxes in the Harris plan are going to go to creating what she calls more opportunity. It's to make sure that every newborn born in this country gets $6,000
using the services.
So the guy tried to say, well, this is just like the property tax. People pay taxes on stuff that is just sitting there anyway, that they've already technically purchased. And the CNBC hosts are like trying to school this guy, saying, well, I know we get that, but the property tax is used for other things like police and fire, whatever. I still think this personal property tax in Missouri has to go. Bill Eigel was so great about that. I don't want to digress too much here, but the fact that you are paying taxes on a appreciable thing that you've already purchased is totally and completely ridiculous. And I realize what happened is Bill Eigel wanted to pass this personal property tax repeal, and a lot of people got in the way of it, claiming that, yeah, but if you repeal it, then we will have to cut our police force. It's like, no, why don't you stop going to conventions in Las Vegas and spending money on other stuff? And you can keep the police officers and the fire or whatever public services you claim are supported by the personal property tax. It's called budgeting, and you and I have to do it when we live our daily lives. And if you don't have money for something, you can't just go to your neighbor's house and say, hey, I need more money. Or if you don't have the money for it, your first choice or for something, your first choice isn't to not feed your kids that night and instead go to the movies. No, that doesn't work that way. You have to budget. Unfortunately, governments don't have to budget. And of course, this happened with the installation of the federal income tax, which I think should be repealed anyway. And of course, Calvin Coolidge famously warned that with the federal income tax, you're just going to balloon the government. And then eventually it's going to get to the point where you're going to spend, an average American's going to spend 2.5 days solely working for the government. I tell my kids that all the time, that technically I work about 2 days, 2.5 days for the government during the week. You just need to choose which day is your day that you're making money. The other days you're working solely to pay your taxes. That's the reality of it. And more people should talk in that form. And then more people would ultimately then at that point say, oh, that's really a bad thing that we're doing. Why don't we just go back to the drawing board like the founding fathers intended and just have the state collect taxes and then the federal government's on a diet, and that's how it goes. Anyway, this plan, if you get right down to it, is $5 trillion and would be completely destructive. Just her entirety of her tax plan, but the unrealized capital gains is going to be an absolute nightmare.
And sure, and all the revenue that comes in from these unrealized gains taxes and the other taxes in the Harris plan are going to go to creating what she calls more opportunity. It's to make sure that every newborn born in this country gets $6,000
using the services.
Well, look, you're arguing that this is some sort of foreign concept that's completely unknown in the U.S. tax code.
It's probably unconstitutional. It's probably, and it was never in anyone's intent to tax.
It's not an income tax,
and it's never going to happen. Probably. Not I'm not going to say my lifetime.
I wouldn't say that.
Not in Becky's lifetime.
They're just laughing at this guy because he's so stupid and silly. I feel sorry for the guy trying to go to bat for a policy that is absolutely just totally will be destructive to our economy and the people who are moving and shaking in the economy. The Tax Foundation found that ultimately this 2025 budget proposal being put together by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Keep in mind, Kamala Harris is trying to run as not an incumbent. She's trying to act like she just fell from the sky and had nothing to do with Joe Biden or his administration or his policies or anything, which is the craziest thing about this is Kamala Harris is acting like she just came on the scene. I'm like, girl, you are the vice president of the United States. You're in the Biden administration, and you are on the hook for everything that Biden did, or for that matter, didn't do. So the Tax Foundation found that this latest budget proposal for 2025, which is similar to Harris's own economic proposals and plans, because why? Well, because she's Joe Biden's vice president, and they both think the same about budgets and taxes and spending. So the Tax Foundation found that it would reduce the gross domestic product by 1.6%. That is monster when you look at, for instance, an increase of like 3.2%, which is what the goal of the Trump administration was, and it was reached. When you just simply cut that in half, that's destructive. Reduce wages by about 1.1%. I don't know how they calculate that, and reduce full-time equivalent jobs by 666,000. Why would it reduce full-time jobs? Because when there are people of wealth, many of whom employ a lot of people not always of wealth, then those individuals ultimately are going to say, well, you know what? In order to keep my wealth, and that's not greed, that's you keeping money you've worked hard for. In order for me to keep my wealth, I'm going to just simply do what I'm doing with fewer employees. That's how it works. As you've seen, it's happened with the $20 an hour minimum wage. You've got all kinds of fast food places, like in California. Oh my goodness, these places are closing restaurants. And if they're not closing restaurants, they're firing half their staff or making half their staff part-time instead of full-time. Why? Because they've been ordered to pay their employees $20 an hour, and they're thinking, well, I'm not doing that. If I have to do that, if I have to pay them $20 an hour and I have 12 employees, then I'm going to decide to pay only 6 of them $20 an hour and either get rid of the other ones or make them part-time. That's how it works, because people who are already working on thin profit margins aren't going to willingly give up their incomes ostensibly to the government. So it is something that is untenable, and as CNBC even points out, totally unconstitutional. And I dare say to CNBC, well, listen, you guys were so anti-Trump, and CNBC was. All that Squawk Box panel, occasionally I'll watch them, and they just seemed very, very anti-Trumpy. And so some of these people who kind of paved the way by either being negative or not positive when there are positive things to say are kind of responsible for the fact that we've got these two stooges now at the higher reaches of the White House. And so some of them are to blame for this. And CNBC is just, I don't know. Jim Cramer is another example of that. He supports Kamala Harris. I'm like, why would you do that? I think a lot of times he deals with stocks, and sometimes these people don't care really necessarily who might be in power, but they will when they start getting pinched on the tax issue. All right, the latest breaking news today was the release by the FBI of the photos of Thomas Crooks's rifle and explosive devices. And the FBI is now claiming that Thomas Crooks had a mixture of ideologies, but his true motive is unknown. The pictures, he had the backpack, the explosives, everything else. And oddly enough, the FBI, even though it's clear he used a ladder, is claiming that Thomas Crooks used an air conditioning unit to climb on top of that building. And if you look at a picture of the air conditioning unit that the FBI says he used to access the roof, you still have to have a ladder. You unless you're 10 feet tall, which he wasn't, you're not going to get up on that roof. But they released the photos of the gun, and they also say, according to the FBI, there's accounts tied to Thomas Crooks that searched for explosive devices as early as 2019, and he searched for explosive devices, including detonating cord, how to make a bomb from fertilizer, how do remote detonators work. That's according to CBS News. And the FBI also said accounts tied to Crooks searched for topics related to Trump, Biden, and dates for the DNC and RNC conventions. This is their quote. Beginning in late September, an online account of 2023, an online account tied to Crooks was used to search for Trump campaign events scheduled in Pennsylvania. From April 2024 through July 12th, the gunman searched for information on campaign events for both Trump and President Biden. Now, of course, all of this, in my opinion, and I'm not much of a conspiracy theorist necessarily, but all of this is designed to kind of whitewash the fact that Trump was a target. And they're kind of trying to act like, well, everybody was a target. We don't know what his ideologies are, and they're trying to claim somehow that all of the accusations that he's a threat to democracy, that he's a new Hitler, that he's racist, that he's this, that he's that, he's going to destroy the country, had nothing to do with Thomas Crooks. Of course, Thomas Crooks is dead. And we can't even be sure that anything they're telling us about what they found online is actually true because we don't have access to it. And we're dealing with the same law enforcement agency, by the way, that spied on President Trump. So I'm not quite sure that the FBI or any of our federal law enforcement agencies really have a vested interest in making Trump a victim. That all this just kind of happened, and we don't know what Thomas Crooks was thinking, and he was after everybody, and this and that. And again, I'm not going to be crazy here, but I don't necessarily buy everything the FBI is telling us about what they found on his computer, because they could tell us anything. And with an organization that's already been proven to be underhanded and nefarious, and in some cases plotting, it's hard to believe anything they're saying to us. In fact, I'm not even sure that's really the gun. I'm not even quite sure those explosives are really there. I don't know whether Thomas Crooks really did search for detonating devices or for Biden campaign appearances or whatever. But it's like, oh yeah, he was after the DNC and the RNC. It's like, okay, maybe. But of course, as I've told you before, and I don't want to be a crazy conspiracy theorist necessarily, but there's only one thing that I truly believe really happened, but can be convinced it didn't, and that was the moon landing. I still believe we landed on the moon, although you could probably convince me, given the lack of trust that has developed against our institutions and everything else, I'll believe anything or I will not believe anything. So that's kind of where we're at right now. And that's not my fault. I'm not goofy. I'm not seeing things and I'm not making this up. All right, people. Ethan Valencia, thank you so much for everything. You guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks for your support of the Allman Report and of News Talk STL. I hope you have a great rest of your night. I'll see you tomorrow.